So Dawntrail has finally come and started to leave its mark on the Final Fantasy community. And, what a mark it has left indeed. But seeing as I was late to the party, thanks to Elden Ring, I didn't actually get to engage in the conversation and find out why people felt the way they did. As of writing the script, I had just finished the MSQ after a 10-hour stream, and I'm excited not only to start the raids and see where the story goes from here, but also to finally talk about the expansion and share my thoughts with everyone else. I'm not quite sure how analytical this video is going to be. At the very least, it's going to be me voicing my thoughts about certain elements of the MSQ and the 7.0 content, while also addressing any particular arguments I feel like if they're relevant. And don't worry, this is also going to be largely spoiler-free. I'll be trying to keep what I talk about contained to level 95 and lower, and anything beyond that, or being super important, I'll leave the timecode on screen so you can skip ahead if you haven't finished the MSQ. And before we get into it, I just want to once again invite all of you who watch this video to come over to the stream, twitch.tv/doublelucky. I do basically everything there, and it often builds up to me making a video about certain games I play. I'd love to have you, and I'd love to talk about whatever it is that we have. But now, let's get into the review. So as we have all been told at FanFest, and how the game sets it all up from the final patch of Endwalker, Dawntrail is meant to be our summer vacation after having just saved the world. We meet Wuklamot, who, to summarize her character best, is that she's a shonen protagonist. And CBU3 even agrees with me because they have scenes where anime action lines appear on a frame when she has a reaction to something. Wuklamot's whole deal is that she is going to be participating in the rite of succession to become the new leader of Tuliolol, competing against her adoptive brothers, Kona and Zeralja, as well as this arrogant dickhead's Bakul Jaja. All of this is because their idol, or adoptive father, Gulul Jaja, is growing old, and one of his two heads who governs Rizdom? Really? I said fucking Rizdom? And all of this is because their idol, or adoptive father, Gulul Jaja, is growing old, and one of his two heads, who governs wisdom and reason, has been lying dormant for a very long time now. This rite of succession will have them travel across the southern half of the continent, Tyrol, in order to learn about the different peoples and cultures that live there, so they may grow into being fit for being the new Dawn Servant. As for our contestants, we've already gotten to know Wuklamot, but her brother Kona is essentially all of her traits but reversed. The brain to her brawn, the pragmatism to her sentimentality. He loves his country just as much as his sister does, of course, but at this point, he values progress and innovation over everything else to have his country thrive. Zeralja is the only biological child to Gulul Jaja because two-headed Mamulja supposedly can't have children, and he is very much a might-makes-right warmonger type who establishes that he wants Tuliolol not only to be the dominant nation of the world, but for everyone to understand the value of the peace they want by having them experience war once again, seeing as the last one they all experienced was 80 years ago. And Bakul Jaja is another two-headed Mamulja, which in their people's culture is a sacred creation that's born out of a union between two different types of Mamulja, and even then is like a 1 out of 100 kind of situation, so it's very important. His attitude is purely Mamulja supremacy, and he wants to win so he can make Mamulja the dominant culture of Tuliolol, but otherwise, he just wants to win for the sake of winning, and will be willing to do literally anything to ensure he wins no matter what. And throughout this journey on the rite of succession, we accompany Wuklamot with the twins, Kryel and Erenville, to help her in whatever tasks she needs, which is even encouraged by Gulul Jaja because that's part of how he came to be the Dawn Servant in the first place. And by performing these tasks, we learn the cultures and ways of life for the 6 different peoples of southern Tyrol, all culminating in an attempt to find the Golden City. The one who can break the seal by usage of keystones these cultures give them becomes the new Dawn Servant. So, now that we have the basic understanding of what we were in store for this expansion, we can start to actually talk about it. First off, for those of you that may be currently playing through it, or those that have already, you'll have noticed that we moved through these tests of the Rite of Succession pretty quickly, already getting to our 3rd keystone before level 94, and reaching the 6th test by that point anyways. That's because Dawntrail's story has 2 halves to it. One argument I've heard between everyone I've spoken to is it feels like they were trying to tell 2 stories, which they very much were. But this is said in the same vein as Stormblood, where the writers were struggling to commit to one location or the other and had to make do. Dawntrail, on the other hand, basically has two acts. Act 1 is the Rite of Succession, and Act 2 is... This has the effect on both the pacing and the level of investment that we have on the story itself. When it comes to the pacing, I feel like that's the weakest part of the first half of Dawntrail's story. When we meet Wuklamad in the last passage of Endwalker, it's a bold and fun introduction to her character and the premise of Dawntrail. But for the first hour or two of the expansion itself, we have a lot of reading and a lot of exposition given to us about Tural, without actually even engaging in it. After that, we start to interact with the different cultures, but in my opinion, the Hanu and the Pelu are very slow and not all that engaging. Once we are nearly done with the Moblin village, it feels like the ball finally starts to roll, and it basically does, picking up speed like crazy, especially in the second half of the story. Now, as far as investment goes, a lot of people do bring up how it feels underwhelming how we went to the edge of the universe to defeat the Endsinger, and how we've slayed actual gods, but we're going through a tournament arc. I can understand this, but I feel like it's a matter of expectations set. Personally, I feel as though that once you finish Endwalker, you are perfectly within your right to say that the story ends there and you can put down Final Fantasy XIV, but for those of us that don't, it's supposed to be some fun adventuring and a new land, in part due to Emmett Selk giving us plot hooks to follow, and that's basically what it is. Until the second half. Still, I generally enjoyed the first half of the MSQ, and it just got better and better once I was nearly done with the Moblin area. I will say though, that the fourth area's story was essentially pure filler. While it did have some relevance to what we did afterwards, it very much could have been written to just not be included and hardly anything would change. Not to say that I didn't enjoy it, I absolutely love the Wild West mini-setting and how we got to experience the story of the Arizona Ranger. I just personally wish it ended up being more important and not an in-between point in the story is all. And then there's actually where the second half starts from the attack on Tulialal, and holy shit dude, is the second half fucking good. The amount of lore we get to interact with, the reveals, the questions, the answers, all of it. The second half of the MSQ gives us so much meaningful world building right in front of our eyes and opens up our ability to experience so many new things in the future. It is absolutely insane. And of course, there's the characters, but I'll go over them in a bit when I cover characters specifically. So overall, I loved the Dawntrail MSQ. It had plenty of flaws, don't get me wrong, but going from start to finish, I feel like it's a fantastic start to the new journeys we'll be embarking on. Now to get into probably the biggest point of contention for Dawntrail, the characters. And yes, I do believe that they actually are, and there are plenty of reasons for that, some of which I even agree with. But let's start off with the character that has the most discussion around them.
Because if there's one thing my journey has taught me, it's that your happiness is my happiness!
Yep, it's our new cat girl. I want to say favorite, but as discussions on the internet go, she's far from that, and while I love her, she's also still not my favorite. While I would expand on her character, it really can be boiled down to her being a shonen protagonist, like I said earlier. She fights for a good cause in the simplest understanding there is, she tries to love everyone, and she's great at fighting. The whole reason she wants to be Dawn Servant is so she can keep Tulialal in a state of peace and happiness like Gulul Jaja did, and to stop Zeralja from going full warmonger. Throughout the MSQ, she gets plenty of opportunities to show weakness, flaws, mistakes, and moments of cuteness. Because did you really think that Square Enix wasn't gonna take the opportunity to make the most cat-like cat girl this game has ever seen look cute? The two main arguments I see against Wuklamad are that she has no character development and that she overstays her welcome, to the detriment of the whole story. When it comes to character development, Wuklamad does get character development. She goes from naively thinking that all she has to do is say, "No fighting!" and everyone will be happy together and sing Kumbaya, or to understanding that she can't do everything herself, let alone any particular thing as good as her family members, without approaching things more carefully. Not only that, but she's even resolved to kill Zoraija after his attack on Talialal, which, considering the type of character she is and the archetype she fills out, is something I've basically never seen before in media, or at the very least, so few and far between that I can't remember the last time I saw it even. Now when it comes to the argument of her overstaying her welcome, that's definitely more of a matter of personal preference, I suppose. The common thing said for this point is how her story ended when she became Dawn Servant, and I guess that's true in some ways, but her story is tied very closely to Zoraija, considering how he views her, especially after the final trial she goes through for the Rite of Succession. And then from there, well, she gets involved with Alexandria and Sphene.
Ah, there you are, Lamati.
Now, I already like Wooklamat, and I like shonen characters, so I never felt she overstayed her welcome, but I also know shonen characters aren't for everyone, and I get that. But the point of her being around too much does also account for the Scions not being utilized very well or very much this expansion. That I can agree with, but not because of Wooklamat. I'll talk about them together shortly. But one thing that is more of a misconception with how Wooklamat was handled in Dawntrail is her voice acting. The point I'm going to give is spoilers, so if you really don't want any of that, I'll still skip ahead, but this is the best case for Wooklamat's voice actress. During the halfway point when Talialal gets invaded, the voice acting there broke my goddamn heart, and I could feel such quality coming from Wooklamat's voice actress.
Come on. Come on. Take it. Please.
She absolutely has the talent to be a phenomenal voice actress, and I wish her the best with future roles. But that is not to say that she had some weak line reads from time to time, such as the start when we get on the boat, or near the very last part of the story, where I feel like everything fell apart around her, in terms of voice acting. And this is not just a Wooklamat problem, this is a problem with the voice direction in general with Dawntrail. But I'll go over it once I've discussed all the characters, because this is a flaw that affects all of them. But, moving on now to other characters of note for this expansion, I want to talk about Bakul Jaja and Zoraija, our two antagonists for Dawntrail. The reason I want to talk about them both is because of the expectations I had for them. The summaries I gave at the start for both of them are pretty accurate for a large portion of the MSQ, but in the last zone for the Rite of Succession, both of their character trajectories change radically. With Bakul Jaja, we learn why he's the dickhead's Mamulja supremacist that he is, and why he was so set on winning at any cost. This leads him to getting redeemed more or less, but at the time it happened, I felt it was way too quick. Spoilers for the revelation, but the way two-headed Mamulja are born is very much like the vessels in Hollow Knight, where dozens if not hundreds end up dead or stillborn, all in the pursuit of one perfect creation. This means Bakul Jaja has the pressure of not only his home, but the generations of dead siblings. While I like the motivation, the fact that we were chummy with him as soon as we learned that, even with saying, you still need to pay for your crimes, it just felt too sudden and unearned, so I was resigned to still hate him. Thankfully, they wrote him well to use his strong force of personality to be a much more likable character, so I'm more okay with it. And now he's basically a good guy trying to stay good. If they had this occur over several levels and zones, I'd feel this would be a much better redemption. As for Zoraija, I honestly was really interested in him from the start. He's the stoic and proud character with a darker desire, and even his motivation was at least comprehensible. The idea that he still cares about Talialal but feels that the people don't value the peace they do and need to be reminded of its value because of war and what peace costs is very interesting to me. But then Wooklamat is passing each of these trials with relative ease by doing something he finds foolish, and it just pisses him off more and more and more. When we finished the trial to make the tacos, I was genuinely curious what was going on through his head, and then we see him start to lose it. I was so down for seeing where his character would go, and then, well, spoilers happened. And speaking of those spoilers, I feel like it's a bit of a soft blow for the writers to go with him wanting to have something to actually live up to, and feeling like he had no purpose in his birth. It's fine to give him a sympathetic motivation, but honestly, just having him go off the deep end with just pure hatred and thinking he is right would have been appealing enough to me, at least. But now, as for the Scions, I want to first say that obviously I still enjoy the Scions, and I was happy to see them in the story. But I honestly feel like it was a big mistake to have them there, probably even with Kryl. The main reason I feel that way is because we had just finished Endwalker, which is 90 levels and hundreds of quests for people to go through. While the story is incredible, the new player experience needs to be accounted for, and I feel like Dawntrail would have been the best opportunity for that, letting even fresh adventurers come to the land of Tural if they want to, and follow along on this journey. But because we have the Scions in the story, and they are persistent and long-standing characters, we no longer have that option for different new player experiences. But that's my own wishes. As far as their inclusion in the story is concerned, I do feel as though they were kind of lacking. Alphino and Alixe didn't really contribute anything. Estinian was just there, and he was mainly just lighthearted comedy. Thancred and Oriange didn't get much screen time, and Y'shtola and Graha, while providing their insight and being the most useful, probably weren't needed, at least to show up in Tural. The Scion we give the most proper attention to is Kryl, but even then, we don't learn anything relevant to her until the last stretch of the entire expansion, which is a massive shame, considering she was one of the 3 focus characters this expansion, among Wuklamot and Erenville. But now there's still the rest of the characters of Dawntrail, and I just don't have much I feel like I have to talk about with them. What I want to talk about instead is how all of the characters suffer in the story, and it's mainly with voice direction. A wise Brick had said in a video that when it comes to the quality of a voice performance, its 3 points of failure are the writing, the acting, and the direction. As you could imagine, given that I'm bringing it up, I agree with this. Final Fantasy XIV had pretty good writing throughout much of its life under Yoshi P's game direction, and I largely still believe that for Dawntrail, the lowest quality it has is the difference of speech patterns between the voice cutscenes and all other times for characters like Wuklamot. And we have heard so many fantastic performances throughout the game's life, of which I don't think were any worse here in Dawntrail. But the direction is where I feel like this expansion suffered the most. Wuklamot has had some weak line reads, none of the Scions had any standout lines, and Kafkiwa sounds nothing like Erenville, despite being his mother, even if we consider 30 years she spent in Alexandria. I'm not sure if anything changed with the team in charge of the voice acting, but if there has, then I would say that explains a fair bit of why voice acting seems a lot weaker this expansion. And now there's one last point I'd like to talk about when it comes to Dawntrail, and that's the gameplay and how fun and difficult it is. I bring this up because there were 2 hot topics surrounding Dawntrail around the time of its release. The first being the healer strike, and now the difficulty of endgame dungeons and raids, on normal mode, mind you. If you don't know what the healer strike is, it was a very insubstantial movement before Dawntrail's launch where all healer mains said they wouldn't play a healer so that people would have very long queue times and realize that they did need healers. And all of this was due to healer design in Final Fantasy XIV being unsatisfying to many people from the start, and how on the media tour, it was revealed how every class was getting a massive upgrade to party survival, and that Xenosis, this guy right here,
I'm clicking my abilities, whatever, it doesn't matter.
Cleared a dungeon on the media tour with no healers. But now that we're actually experiencing the dungeons and the raids of Dawntrail, I can absolutely say that the need for healers has not been this intense for years. There are some mechanics in these dungeons to where you can't tank privilege through it, and any DPS are gonna get smoked if they don't actually do these mechanics correctly. And with the raids, we actually have healing checks. When was the last time you saw a healing check outside of Extreme or Savage content, huh? I haven't leveled a healer yet to go through this content, but I'm incredibly excited to do so, because I'll have to actually work hard to keep everyone alive. And as far as the general difficulty of everything goes, well, I did say you can't tank privilege your way through them because of mechanics like this one, where if you get hit by a mechanic, you can't take any actions and your movement speed is slowed, so you're more likely to get hit by even more mechanics. And with the raids, these feel like a really solid step up from previous normal mode raids, not just because of using the mechanics that already exist, but also the nature of them pushing the encounter design even further. I mean, come on, we all fell in love with Honeybee Lovely at least once, right? Not only that, but the final boss of the raid tier on normal difficulty has mechanics that happened almost as if it's an extreme trial. And now, yes, the content is undeniably much harder at the base level than it was in Shadowbringers or Endwalker, but having gone through it all completely blind, I feel as though that any reactions to it saying that it's too hard are people that got a little too comfy with their brain-dead daily grind for tomestones without stepping foot into Extremes or Savage. Yoshi P even said that he was falling asleep during his roulette and was going to be upping the difficulty of the content to keep people more engaged. So while I understand some people might be blindsided by this, I feel as though that it's for everyone's benefit to have their skills pushed and elevated at least a little bit. I personally love and welcome this new difficulty increase, and I'm incredibly excited for jumping into Savage and Extremes. You know, when I've got some free time. So, all in all, Dawntrail definitely could have done more to have itself be the start of a new journey, especially in regards to the new player experience, and there was some hiccups with the overall quality of the story and the characters, but at the end of it all, I still very much enjoyed the expansion, at least on launch. The start was a tad slow, but the pace just kept picking up constantly until the latter half, and then it was just straight gas. And then we can cap it all off with some of the most engaging normal mode content I've experienced in such a long time with this game. That much leaves me incredibly happy with what CBU3 was trying to do, and it makes me excited for what comes in the future. I hope that all of you had some positive experience with the expansion like I have, or if you didn't, then I hope this video was enough to help you find at least a little bit of positivity with it. Regardless, I thank you for sticking around to the end if you did, or even just skimming to the end. If you like more of what I have to say, giving a like, a subscribe, or a comment would be plenty, and I would also love to have you come by the stream, twitch.tv/doublelucky. I do a whole slew of games there, and I often plan on making other videos discussing them. I hope to see you around later, and I hope that you have a great rest of your day. Goodbye, everybody.